We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Lako, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Welcome to Paring Down, everyone. Today's episode is a little different than our normal episode, so I do want to give a little bit of a disclaimer that if you usually listen with young ears around, this is not the best week to be listening with those little ears nearby. I just want to make sure that you all know today we are talking about Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, which is the book written by our guest, Kristen A. Jenson, about inappropriate photos and videos our kids might be exposed to. I'm not going to use the word that rhymes with corn here in the intro in case you're still making sure you turn this off for the little people around you. But that is primarily what today's episode is about, because this podcast is about paring down our use of belongings, of technology, of beliefs, really making sure we get to the bottom of what we're doing in order to make sure we do it intentionally. And I know that most of you listening, all of you listening who are parents, want to be intentional parents. And it is so important that we take an intentional approach to what our kids are exposed to. So while this conversation might feel uncomfortable at first, I think you'll find that it actually relieves a lot of anxiety instead of creating anxiety, and is ultimately another tool in our tool belt for living more intentionally, particularly as parents or grandparents. I do want to make a note that today is not about toxic messaging regarding our bodies, regarding our children's bodies, about making any sort of sexuality shameful. I feel very strongly about that, and so does she. So this conversation is neither religion-based nor is it shame-based. So I hope that ultimately it helps you feel like you have a plan moving forward, that you are ultimately living more intentionally as a parent or grandparent or caregiver. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest, Kristen A. Jenson. She is the founder of Defend Young Minds and the #1 best-selling author of Good Pictures, Bad Pictures and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Jr., which are both read-aloud books to teach young children how to reject inappropriate videos and photos. Her books have been translated in over a dozen languages and are now augmented by Guidebook for Counseling Kids, which supports child therapists and educators. Kristen and her team have developed a wide range of resources, including the Brain Defense Digital Safety Curriculum, which arms children with the best kid-to-kid digital safety program using entertaining videos, engaging workbooks, and family activities to protect children ages 7 through 11 from online dangers. On her website, there's also downloadable guides and timely articles to help millions of parents raise empowered, resilient, and screen-smart kids. Kristen has raised her voice at international conferences and symposiums such as the United Nations Civil Societies Conference, the American Association of Christian Counselors, and the National Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation Global Summit. She has testified before the Washington State Senate Law and Justice Committee on the Public Health Crisis of Corn and supported national legislation to protect kids online. Alrighty, let's dive into this conversation with Kristen A. Jenson. Kristen, thank you so much for coming on Paring Down today.
It's great to be with you, Shannon. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. We are about to dive into a conversation that I've already in the introduction given my listeners a little bit of a heads up can be something that is challenging to talk about. But as you know, Paring Down is all about intentional living. And this is a really intentional way to ensure we are raising our children in a way that is healthy and approaching screen time intentionally. And so I definitely am excited to share your story and your message with everyone listening today. So before we totally dive in, would you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and an overview of what you do?
Okay. Well, I am principally a mom and a grandma now, and a wife. I'm married for quite a long time, and my child right now is my dog. But I have 3 grandchildren, and I am watching them grow up in a very challenging world. And you mentioned about being intentional. And that's exactly what the tech companies don't want. The social media companies, they want to hijack your attention and get you scrolling and get you pulled in and take your time. And they don't want you to be intentional about it. Yes, there are the controls that they've been kind of forced to put on phones, and I would totally use them. But I love this idea that you promote of being intentional and being intentional about our use of technology.
Yes. So, you are an author of Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, as well as the founder of Defend Young Minds. And would you share with everyone kind of the central focus of both the books and your organization?
Absolutely. So the books primarily are a tool for parents and other, people that care for children to give them a definition of what a bad picture or video is, what pornography is, help them to understand that it's dangerous. So give them a warning. And then third, give them a plan so that so they know exactly what they can do when they see it, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But I don't know about you, Shannon, but when I am caught off guard, I don't do so well. And it's the same with our kids. They don't do so well when they're caught off guard by pornography. But if we give them a definition, a warning, and a plan, then they know what to do. And just to let you know, when I started writing Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, it was because I met a family whose oldest son, at the time he was 17, he had started to act out sexually on his younger brothers and sisters. And pornography was driving it. And so from the 14 to the 4-year-old, and it had some pretty devastating consequences for that family. I would say that, and so I came out from hearing about that story, and I woke up the next morning and I just had to find a resource for this mother. And I thought, oh, there'll be all these books on Amazon, you can just go and buy one for her. And when I couldn't find one, I realized this is crazy. There needs to be something out there for this tough talk that parents obviously need to be having with their kids. And so that's when I started writing Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And it really is just a comfortable tool to start the conversation with your child and give them a heads up so they know exactly what to do when they are confronted with it.
Right. And I'm so grateful that you took the bull by the horns and said, well, someone's got to do this, right? Because it's not an easy thing to talk about. Yet we do have resources for talking about the birds and the bees and some of these other challenging subjects to talk about with kids. But when it comes to sexuality and anything to do with that, it can feel really shameful and really awkward. And so we just avoid it. But that doesn't mean that they're not experiencing it, that they're not exposed to it. So we either have the choice of saying, okay, like you said, I'm going to face this head on, and this is part of parenting, even if it's uncomfortable, or I'm just going to let what the rest of the world teach my children or ensnare them in what could become something that's really damaging, right? Like as parents, I've learned, and I'm still learning, right? I'm relatively young into parenthood, but 7 years in, and I'm really learning that I have to put aside my own comfort for the well-being of my children all the time. And I'm just so grateful that you did this, because I'm sure it wasn't easy, but you obviously have a lot of experience both as a mom and now a grandma. And that empathetic heart is just a really powerful way to start. So you mentioned that these help start the conversation. Can you share kind of how do we start the conversation when we're talking to our kids about pornography?
Well, that is the problem. It's kind of difficult because, when I was writing this book, my neighbor is a social worker, and she actually worked with children that had been shown pornography and were into pornography, but usually was kind of a grooming situation from a predator. And then she found out that a friend of hers, that her friend's 8-year-old daughter was given an internet connected device for her 8th birthday. And that was also the same time she decided to have that birds and bees conversation about sex. And so this very curious girl did what, they see us do. They just looked at it. She just looked it up. She wanted to know more about it. And nobody had kind of warned her, like, don't be looking for information on the internet about this topic. Come to me. Well, because she didn't get that warning, she did go and look and found horrific pornography at 8 years old. Her personality started to change. She was a bubbly, bright, happy girl. She became withdrawn, sad, would want to spend hours in her room by herself. And so when they finally found out what was happening with her, this mom was just beside herself. Obviously, you feel guilty and you don't know what to do. They did give her help, some counseling, so that's wonderful. But my friend, my neighbor, came to me when I talked to her about this book project, and she was like, I have been like praying for some way to talk about this with my boys, because even though I'm a social worker and I've dealt with this professionally, I don't know how to start this conversation with my kids. So we have developed at Defend Young Minds, we have a free guide called How to Talk to Kids About Pornography that you can download, and it gives you some steps. So the first thing is educate yourself, right? Get the facts, understand the problem. And hopefully as you're listening here, you're getting some of that. And then 2, arm the children, start to talk, have these conversations. It's not a one and done. And you can do a lot of different things. Obviously, you can read the book, but you can also add to that. You can, we send out a newsletter every week, and many parents will use that as kind of like a talking point, like every week for like a tech talk. Maybe they have Tech Talk Tuesday, or maybe on a Sunday afternoon, or maybe when they're driving in a car. It has to feel kind of comfortable. Sometimes face-to-face is not as comfortable. So sometimes you can just be talking with your children when they're playing like Legos, or they're doing something with their, playing with something, and you can just begin. And I would say like a little drip, drip, drip method, like a little here, a little there. When you plant seeds, if you turn on the hose full blast to water them, it's really not going to have a good outcome. And it's the same with talking to kids about these. You kind of want a constant drip, 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 so that they know who to come to and they get information, but it's not overwhelming. You were talking about how it can be shameful. Pornography is shameful, I think. I think most of it is horrifically violent, misogynist. I think it is. But it's not shameful to talk about it. It's not shameful to warn our kids about it. It's actually very empowering.
Right. And our bodies aren't shameful. Those are very separate things. Yeah. And I think the more we don't talk about it with a straightforward ability, the more that they take they can sense that shame, and then they apply it to their bodies, and they think, oh, we're shameful about our bodies. But you're like, no. Like, it's just the pornography is the shameful thing. But they don't know how to make that differentiation unless we make that very clear. And I love what you said about the drip, drip, drip kind of, little bit at a time effect, because that's the approach I've taken in terms of helping my children be aware of what's appropriate so that they don't get sexually assaulted or abused, right? Like very little at a time. I mean, start when they're probably around 3 years old, where I say, is anybody allowed to see your private parts? And at first they're like, what? And then you just kind of talk what your private parts are. And then you talk about how to say no, and then practice out loud saying no. So every time we change underwear, I have my daughter say out loud, no, you can't touch me. Pretend like I'm someone who's not mommy. And I have to get her to practice that. But I don't do it all at once. I wasn't like, let's sit down and have this huge conversation. But now she's 5. We're 2 years into this. And she's very aware. So whenever she's going somewhere new, whether it's a summer camp or to a new friend's house, I say, hey, remember what we've talked about with private parts? There shouldn't be anyone there that is going to talk to you about it, but you know what to do, right? And she just, she hardly has to think about it. She says, I yell at them and I say, no, you're not my mommy. And I run home and I tell you. She like gets it. And it's just part of our life, right? And she knows that it's called a vagina and she knows what things are called. So anyways, I feel comfortable talking about that because I think that there has been a movement online helping parents learn how to prepare their children for that. But when it comes to pornography, that's not as talked about. So with that being said, you mentioned it's important to inform ourselves about the facts so that we can inform our children. What are some of the most alarming facts about pornography that we should know?
That is a great question. And the statistics can change, daily. I would say one of the more alarming ones, by the time a kid is in high school, 90% of kids have seen pornography. It's probably really 99%, 99.9%. I would say that it's just so ubiquitous. I think another alarming statistic is that parents, and there are many studies that show this, parents routinely underestimate their child's exposure to pornography. So they did a study in the UK on this exact topic. So they've known for a while that parents underestimate the negative experiences kids are having online. They know that, but they wanted to do just for pornography. So they had this cohort of parents. And they asked the parents, how many of you think your kids have been exposed to pornography? 25% said yes. It was actually more than double that really had seen it. So then they asked the kids, have you seen pornography? Honestly, I would tend to believe that even that was a little underreported.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that a lot of parents think, well, my kid's a good kid. So a good kid wouldn't look at bad pictures. It's like that's not it, right? The pictures are bad for your kid, but it doesn't make your kid a bad kid to have been curious. So I think that's very important to point out. There's some other studies that show that pornography actually is so addicting that even children can become addicted to it. And I could go into the brain chemistry of it, but it has the same pathways as any addictive substance. So it acts on the parts of the brain, the dopamine and the reward center. And it's easy for kids to get, right? Because if you had a meth problem and you could get meth from your phone 24/7 for free, right? Would you have an addiction issue? Could you have an addiction issue? Absolutely. So we protect our children from substances. There was a time when a little kid could walk to the corner store and buy cigarettes for their parents, but no more, right? And same thing with alcohol. So we've got laws in place for that, and we need better laws for internet safety as well. But right now, the easiest addiction for a kid to develop is a pornography addiction from their devices, from their phones. And I have talked with many therapists who deal with children as young as 6 who have a full-blown pornography addiction. Now, that might be, we may think, oh, that would never be my kid. That's an outlier. But I've talked to adults that struggled with an addiction for decades, and their parents never knew about it at all, ever. Right. So it's something that people can hide. So we want to give kids the power to know the harms of pornography, to understand how it can harm their brain, how it can also change the way that they look at other people. Because pornography is a very powerful teacher because of its effect on the brain. And it teaches you that, people's bodies are objects to be used, and they're not real people. They're not, so to objectify a person, and I always think objectify is not a strong enough word. It should be like inhumane objectification, because when I talk to parents and teach about this, I say, you can kick a ball and the ball isn't going to, you don't have to worry about hurting the ball's feelings or anything like that. But if you kick a person, that's a problem. Now, if you've turned a person into an object, it makes them easier to kick. It makes them easier to hurt. So that's just one thing, Then there's all kinds, I could go on forever, Shannon, but there's all kinds of mental health harms now that are associated with pornography consumption, even higher suicide rates. So we need to give our kids a heads up and help them. And I'm just so impressed with people like you who are willing to tackle a tough topic like this, that are willing to get this information out to those who trust you and follow you. I really, really appreciate that. It takes a lot of courage to do that.
Well, it's an honor to have this kind of a platform to talk about this kind of thing, because this is the kind of thing that if we don't move with the times, right, then we aren't being intentional about our lives and about our children's lives. Like, the world is just different than it was before the internet. And so maybe, not entirely, but maybe back in the 80s when I was born, it was a little easier to get by not talking about this kind of a thing, because your child did not have the internet. And my kids don't have the internet, but other kids do. And they could be shown it at school. They could accidentally come across it, like on different browsers. We've seen it happen even in schools where they think it's a protected browser. And then suddenly a parent is like, why did my kid see this at school? So I know that I am not entirely in charge of my child's experience when the internet is freely out there. And I just really believe in changing with the times. And so this means changing our parenting approach and to understand what they're exposed to on the internet, and not think that, if I keep them safe with me, like, even I have homeschooling friends and all, they're with me. I'm like, that doesn't mean that they're not exposed to anything else, or that we want them at age 18 to suddenly be exposed to everything, like, there's still parenting involved here. You mentioned that there's kids as young as 6. I have a couple questions there. I think some people would say, oh, how is that possible? They haven't hit puberty, so that arousal, they don't understand that piece. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the brain can be prematurely sexualized. It absolutely can be. I remember I spoke with a man who was working on recovery from pornography, and he said that when he was 5, he was watching a movie with his parents, and the movie had some kind of, I don't know if it was a scantily clad woman. I'm sure it kind of went over their heads, like they didn't think anything of it. But for him, it just woke something up in him, because it was a sexualized, obviously, portrayal, right? And he started from then on to be very interested in that. I spoke to another man who, and women also have issues. So, like, I've spoken to many women as well that get into this via erotic literature, romance, that kind of thing. But I spoke to a man who said that he started to look at his mother's, I don't know, is it Victoria's Secret or, some of these lingerie catalogs that came to her, and he would rip out pictures and he would hide them under his Thomas the Train set. And he said one day, they weren't there, like he knew his mom had found them, but she never said anything to him, And he developed a full-blown addiction to pornography. So there was an opportunity there, but obviously she was very uncomfortable and just didn't know how to handle it. So I feel bad for her, and I feel bad for him. So I love, like I said, being intentional, because you can either be intentional about this, or, like, you said, you can kind of cross your fingers, right? And hope that nothing bad happens to your kid, or your kid doesn't get involved. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is this is really taking over a lot of kids' lives. And it's making them more prone to sexual exploitation themselves. So girls that look at pornography are at a much higher risk for earlier entrance into sexual behavior and other forms of sexual victimization. So it's very harmful. We need to protect both our kids. Both our daughters and our sons. And it can be hard, but I think once you get going, once you get started, you can. So back to that question you asked about, can children be sexualized before and be interested in this before puberty? I didn't think they could, but I know now from so many accounts by so many people and by like experts and doctors and neurologists that yes, the brain can become sexualized at a young age. And we just don't want that because that can delay other developmental processes that need to go on. So, for example, they find that girls that are very interested in being sexually attractive and putting a lot of effort into that are like delaying other kinds of things that should be going on. Like children should not be sexualized. Children should grow up without being sexualized. There are important things that their brain has to do and has to learn that have nothing to do with sex. And then there's a time to learn those things, right? An appropriate time. But when kids are sexualized early, it does create some delays and it does create some problems in their emotional and mental development.
So first of all, I very much appreciate all of that information because it does feel weird to us, like, oh, how is that even possible? And I'm curious as well. So for these younger kids, people still might say, oh, well, it's natural. And yes, it's natural for them to be curious. You've said, especially if someone has brought up the birds and the bees conversation or whatever it might be. What would you say to someone who says, well, watching porn isn't shameful. It's not hurting them. They're just exploring. Hey guys, it's time for your ad break. Each week I like to say a huge thank you for your graciousness that these are part of the podcast. Here we go. What would you say to someone who says, well, watching porn isn't shameful. It's not hurting them. They're just exploring. You mentioned this, that they can become, they're more highly probable to be sexual assault victims. I think that's huge. Yeah. But like, why, when we talk about the mental health, or you talked about that little girl who was 8 and she became withdrawn and depressed and all of that, like, why does that happen as a result of watching pornography? First of all,
their brains are just not developmentally capable of even understanding what they're seeing. So that's number one. Second of all, what they're seeing is often incredibly violent. So there are things that I wouldn't even describe to you that are just common, that if your audience, people that are listening to this right now, were to hear it, they would want to go and throw up. So I'm telling you, like, this is so highly disturbing to children that it does produce. And then what happens is that if they do get sexually aroused by sexual violence, they do feel shame. Like, they do feel absolutely guilty about that. Like, how is it that I am being aroused by someone being horribly hurt? And I think that as kids get older, we can talk to them about that the reality when they look at pornography, that's not real. It's a very toxic sexual script. So if you're looking at pornography and thinking that that's how you're going to have a really great marriage and a really great sexual relationship or intimate sexual relationship, it's the absolute 180-degree opposite. And I'm very sex positive. Like, I think I want my kids to have, I have daughters married, and I want her to have a great sex life, and so I made sure she had some books to read, and and I wanted her to be prepared. But pornography does not prepare you for a happy sexual, because it prepares you to think about, first of all, if you think about the ideal sexual intimacy situation in a relationship, there's respect, there's trust, right? It's not about performance, and it's not fake. And so it's so important for us to teach children about healthy sexual behaviors and healthy sexual attitudes. Whereas porn teaches disrespect, it's degrading, it's addicting. And they've done some studies with the whole addiction, thing. It's actually quite interesting, because a normal sexual experience produces normal amounts of dopamine, normal amounts of, these brain chemicals and these endorphins that give you satisfaction. But an addictive substance or an addictive behavior gives you a ton of dopamine, too much dopamine, and not as much endorphins. So there's a high craving for it, but very little satisfaction. So you're always chasing the satisfaction. You're always chasing that. We could talk a lot about the brain science of this, but it's not just exploration. I mean, and if you talk to kids, if you really see, and you see some of the reports that people have done all over the world, you will see that children, the more kids get into pornography, the higher rates of mental health issues they have. So there's continuing more and more studies to show this. So
Right.
I don't know. I think kids have a problem. There's enough coming at our kids. I think exploring sex by looking at porn.
Why would we do that to them? Why would we risk their mental health for that? Like you said, it's one of those things that as adults even, I mean, my husband and I talked about it before we got married, porn use within our marriage, and that was a big no-go. And that was an important conversation for me to have. And, it can affect relationships. As an adult, we know it can affect our relationships, the way we see sex, the way we crave it. Like you said, that dopamine is so high. That's the anticipation molecule versus the endorphins, which sticks around. I mean, that's what I talk about with decluttering, right? Like when we're consuming and overconsumption, you're anticipating that really cute thing that you saw that influencer try and sell you. You go to get it on Amazon. When you get it, it is not nearly as exciting. It's the anticipation of it. So as adults, we see how it affects our marriages, our relationships, and our well-being. And then you amplify that in childhood, how it affects their development on top of their future relationships and the way they see themselves, all of it. And it's just so terrifying to me that it's so prevalent, which is why I'm glad we are talking about it. And speaking of ages, we talked about how this can happen so young. What age do you recommend parents start having this conversation with their children?
Well, I don't recommend a specific age. I recommend that you start having this conversation as soon as your child has any access to the internet via any device. Obviously, a 1-year-old, if you're handing your 1-year-old a phone, don't recommend that. But, you can start. I've had people start reading Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior to their 2-year-old. And we did that with our grandsons. Their mom reads them this book. And so it's just never too early if they have any access to the internet. I mean, as soon as they start toddling around and walking and you go outside with them, you start teaching them, don't run into the street, right? Stop at the curb. How many of us as moms have been yelling at our kids, stop, because we, see them about to launch themselves into the street. And so that's the same way with the internet superhighway. They need some warnings that are age appropriate, that they can understand, that gives them confidence. So we set them up for a wonderful future, right? A future where they can thrive. And I just wanted to circle back with what you were talking about, how it affects marriages. They've done so many studies that show that 60% of all divorces can trace back to, nowadays can trace back to pornography problems. Another thing is they've done a study, and they found out that because there are a lot of counselors, therapists, like marriage therapists, that will say, oh, just, you're having problems with, your sex life, go watch some porn together. That'll be they say this, and it's absolutely wrong. Do not watch porn together unless you want infidelity in your marriage, because people who watch porn together have 3 times higher risk of infidelity, threefold, than people that do not. So again, if we want to set our kids up for happiness and good, solid, committed relationships, we need to teach them to steer away from pornography and reject its messages about sex, because sex should not be a performance. Right. Sex is something that bonds us together. It shouldn't be a performance. I kind of like, when I realized that, it was like a light bulb. Like, that's what so much of our media and so much of our culture teaches. All of this is a performance. And I think that just erodes the relationship, and it brings in insecurities. And anyway.
Well, it's just never something that, in my opinion, should be a comparison. We should never have something to compare our sex lives to. It is a private thing that is so sacred between two people. And that's what makes it so special and so enjoyable and so fun. That's what bonds you to your partner. Like, I always joke, I'm like, there's a reason I love my best friend, but I don't have sex with my best friend. That's what differentiates a romantic relationship in your marriage versus just friendships, right? Like, my husband's my best friend, but also we do other things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that, to me, is what keeps that relationship so distinct from any other relationship that we have. Mm-hmm. And so why would we then compare that one special quality in our relationship to anybody else's, much less something that you said is a performance online, right? Like, it's just the worst thing you could compare to, on top of course, all of the other issues that come with it, like the underbelly of that industry, which I feel very strongly about. I'm like, fine, if you want to argue that pornography, if you say it's good for your relationship, and it's good for your relationship, if you want to say that it's natural to want to see it, that it's not harming, blah, blah, you can believe all that all you want, and you can't deny the fact that this is absolutely what is causing human trafficking, which is causing sexual abuse of children, all of these other things that maybe it's not, you think that it's fine for you. You think I'm not one of the 60% of couples that will get divorced, or that, that's part of the divorce, or I'm not, whatever, infidelity, okay, fine. And do you not care? Do you not care that this is feeding the sexual trafficking of children and young women? Because that's just fact, right? And so I feel very strongly about that.
Go Shannon.
But going back to the ages here. So this is anyone watching on YouTube. Most of my listeners are not watching, but this is the book looks like, and I will make sure, of course, it will be linked in the show notes and all of that. But Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior, I have a 4 and a 5 and a 7-year-old. I was so impressed with how you tackled this conversation, because the fears that will spark curiosity, and then they're going to go look it up if they can or whatever. And I want to talk about that, but also you just talk about, the parts of our bodies that need to be covered with a swimsuit. And a bad picture is when you see something that is not normally covered by a swimsuit. And it's just a very age appropriate book. I want to encourage parents to know that. I even noticed that the one time that the word pornography is in this book is in a subtext that you don't necessarily have to read until you feel comfortable introducing them to that word. The whole book is simply about what to do if you see a picture where someone doesn't have clothes on, or a video where someone doesn't have clothes on, and what to do and how to, all of it. It's just so smart. And so I just really appreciate the way you did that. But what would you say to parents who are like, well, I don't want to read this to my 4-year-old because I am worried that that it will ruin their innocence. Like, they don't even know it exists yet. So why would I bring it up before I have to? Are they going to get curious? What do you say about that?
Yeah. Well, I go back to your intentional thing, is that, you have 2 choices. You can either be proactive and intentional, and because you do not know when your child will see pornography. You think that they won't see it till they're 14, or that you somehow will know. Like, if you could have a crystal ball and say, okay, my kid won't see it till they're, 12, and I can talk to them 2 weeks before or something. I mean, that'd be great. But we just don't know. I've heard some pretty heartbreaking stories of very young children, 3-year-olds, not only seeing pornography, but imitating it. So I think that we don't want to risk that. Now, I know what I hear from parents like, well, wait a minute, I'm going to ruin their innocence. May I just say this, and that is, your child will have so much more power to protect their innocence if you warn them about pornography, rather than just letting it go to chance. Kids need to be warned early in order to protect their own innocence. And I will say that at some point, innocence is not the goal. The goal is making a good choice. The goal is protecting yourself. So I think lots of times we want our kids to be innocent, but actually more than, like when I think of my grandsons, it makes me angry to think that they're going to see this. However, I want them to be empowered. I want them to know what to do. I don't want to, what most kids are facing this alone. And when parents will face this head on, they're going to help their children and keep their children from facing it alone.
Right.
So I'm so grateful again for you tackling this topic, and for all the parents that are going to tackle the topic because of what you're saying and bringing to them. A child that's unprepared is not only more at risk of getting pulled into pornography, like an addiction and all that, but also is at a higher risk for sexual abuse, like hands-on sexual abuse. So I'll tell you a quick story, and I've heard many, but there was a family, they went over to a friend's house for dinner. And they had read, this mom had read her 6-year-old son, good pictures, bad pictures. And so he had a very simple definition of what a bad picture was. And he knew it was harmful and he knew what to do. And he knew also that no one should ever show a child, pornography. No one should ever show a child bad pictures. Well, they were doing some remodeling, so they put all the toys down in the basement, right near the stairs. So they sent the kids and they said, go down, pick out a toy and come back up. So they did. And this little boy was down there, trying to find the perfect toy to play with when he was approached by a man who happened to be renting the downstairs basement. And this man came to this young boy and showed him gay porn on on his phone, and started to groom him. This is fun. It would be fun to do, and blah, blah, blah. Well, this young man was like, wait a minute. That's pornography.
How old was he?
6. That's pornography. And this man knew, here is a child that will be visiting this house. Here is a potential victim. So this child was having none of it. He saw it, he recognized it, and he got himself back upstairs and he told his mom. And he got himself out of that situation because porn is the number one grooming tool of predators. And so if your child can recognize and report the number one grooming tool, guess what? They're not going to be groomed,
Right. And it makes sense that is used.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense that that's used because then a child feels shameful. They can't tell their parents about it because they feel the shame involved with it. And thus they are continuing to be exposed to it. And the grooming continues because they don't feel like they can talk about it. That's absolutely terrifying. And, I think it's hard this day and age. Everyone's like, oh, fear mongering or whatever. I'm like, there is a difference between fear mongering and recognizing the realities of the world that we live in. Those are two very different things. And it's important to know that these things can happen. I even say it just in general, we're not invincible. People, oh, don't worry about this or that. And my mom passed away when I was 24 of bladder cancer. And we don't know why. She's incredibly healthy. It's not hereditary, all of that. And that taught me that anything basically can happen to anyone. right? And
Yeah.
so for me, it just to make sense to be prepared. It's not a matter of like raising anxiety. If anything, conversations like this lower my anxiety. I mean, they hurt my heart when I think of empathetically of what has happened to other children, but they lower my anxiety because they give me a plan forward for my own children, and to know that it is possible to do something to protect them should this sort of thing happen. I mean, gosh, at my own children's elementary school, Kristen, this is terrifying. Last year, a teacher was arrested because of the amount of child pornography he had on his computer. A teacher that I saw every day at drop off at a child's elementary school. These people don't live in dark corners. They are out
Yeah.
there regularly and everywhere, and often close to children. And we can't just pretend that this thing doesn't happen to people who are good parents, who are observant parents, all of that. No, it can happen. And
Mm-hmm.
so, speaking of even that story you just told, or parents who are listening who think their children might have already been exposed, or gosh, they're already 10, I haven't talked to them about it. What should parents do if they find out their child has been exposed to porn?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And we actually have a guide for that. Shameless plug here. We have a guide called My Kid Saw Porn, Now What? And you can download it from defendyoungminds.com. So the first thing is that there's a SMART plan. And the S stands for stay calm. Now, you're not going to be calm. It probably should have been get calm, but I needed an S. So get calm and stay calm. So I had a friend who called me up one day, and she was just like blubbering, like crying. I couldn't even understand her. I finally says, I told her, I said, I'm coming over. Went over. What her 14-year-old was looking at porn on an iPad. And so, she wanted to go to school, pull him out, by the collar and start giving him what for. And I said, no, don't do that. You've got to deal with your own feelings and emotions before you vomit all of that on your kid, right? So I said, you can take 24 hours, you can take 48 hours, you can take 72 hours, you can take a week to formulate a plan. So that's the next step. M, make a plan, because you want to get information from your child. But going back to the drip, drip, drip method that we talked about in the beginning, you don't want a fire hose. You don't want it to be the Spanish Inquisition, right? You want them to be able to open up little by little, and children will test you. They'll give you a little piece. And then if you react calmly and well to that, they'll give you another little piece. If you freak out, it's not the end of the world. And we have a couple articles on that too. But ideally, you want to make a plan. What questions do you want to ask them? And we have a list of questions. You want to do it over time. And then you want to go on to the other steps. But in this guide, it's like over 80 pages, and it's our best advice from therapists. For example, do you want them to describe what they saw to you? We had a therapist answer that question, and the answer is it's okay to let them describe it to you. It's not going to be burned more in their mind. But we have lots of answers, lots of questions in that guide, but you definitely want to be prepared, because it can be shocking, and parents will often feel guilty, ashamed, confused, very worried, all of the above. And so you just take a step back, prepare yourself, take some time, and then you will be able to go forward mentoring your child, helping them to understand why this is important to their health, their mental health. As they get older, you can talk about the unfairness of pornography and how so many women are tricked into it and drugged and trafficked, and they're not going to be able to tell a woman that goes into it of her own accord or one that is absolutely, forced.
Right.
So I would say that if you find out, again, deal with your own emotions first, and then start making a plan, hopefully with your partner or your husband or your wife, and making a plan of how to deal with this. But Porn is the enemy. Your child is not the enemy. And good kids get into porn. And it's curiosity and it's available. And if we haven't warned them, then that's on us. And we have to take, when I talk to teens, I will often say, I just want to apologize that you live in a world that you have to deal with this.
Well, it's heartbreaking, right? It is. It is very heartbreaking. And I can see this on an even much smaller scale of my own experience with like phone use, for example. I oftentimes don't even want to be on my phone. I want to be engaging with my children or reading my book or whatever else I want to do. And yet I sometimes feel like I can't put it down or I can't concentrate on those things if my phone is nearby. And it's frustrating for me. And I've explained that to my kids that like, I don't want you to have to deal with it, right? Like I read an interview somewhere with teenagers who said, I felt relief when my parents took my phone away because I wasn't constantly fighting this urge to use it. Like there's a relief there of making sure that they don't become addicted to whether it's a device or obviously pornography. Like it is something that we can do to help them in so many ways, and they don't want to be doing it. I've said this before on this podcast. It's not an explicitly Christian podcast at all, but I am a Christian. So occasionally my examples reflect my faith. And I think about that scripture where I believe it was Paul who wrote, like, I do what I do not want to do. I don't know why I do what I do not want to do, and like, that's a human struggle. Like we do the things we don't want to do. We eat the extra piece of cake when we're not hungry and we know it's going to make us feel bad later and we're still eating the cake, and so that's how I see it with these kids, right? It breaks my heart. It's not like they want to be aroused by this or they want to be watching this. It's just like they can't help but come back. And as parents, it's up to us to try and give them the tools that you've offered us to help them. I feel like we could have there's so much more to say on this, but I know for the sake of time, we do have to wrap up. So I would just like to end, if you could share with everyone where they can find more of your work, maybe what other resources you have to help them. You've mentioned a couple. I'll make sure that anything you've mentioned is in the show notes, just anything else that can help parents who are listening.
Yeah, great. So they can always obviously come to defendyoungminds.com and download some of the guides, see our books, and we have more books coming. One for girls is coming. We have a book for counselors, so that are counseling kids. And follow us on our social channels, whatever, if you're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, follow us there. We put out a lot of content, and the sales of the books help me fund this whole outreach, which is completely free. There's no monthly subscription you have to pay to get all of this and to get my best advice. It's just a labor of love, trying to help parents, trying to help kids. It's a daunting world, but it can be a wonderful world. Like there's amazing things. And we want to definitely say, the internet is amazing. AI can be amazing. All these things can be amazing. But there's a flip side that we just have to be careful and learn to use them appropriately and intentionally, as you say, intentional use of technology. It's hard. When my grandkids are around, I really am careful about what I do with this phone. I will narrate. I will say, this is what grandma's doing. I have to text your mom or I have to respond to this, and I try to really model good technology use. But yeah, find us at defendyoungminds.com. All my work is there. And I just want to leave and say, you can do this. It's not as hard as you think. Once you get started, it gets to be much more comfortable and easy. And you're going to feel this weight come off your shoulders. You're going to feel so much better to have started to protect your child from pornography and other dangers out there.
I can't thank you enough for your work. I think that even this conversation is probably a good example of how it does become easier, like full disclosure, as we start the conversation, I'm like, how do we enter this conversation, and you know what you're doing. And it was so easy, but it became easier for me to talk about it throughout. Right. Like, and that's just an example that hopefully the listeners can latch onto and know that it's freeing to talk about it, because you're taking that agency over your life and your parenthood and your children in a healthy manner. So I can't thank you enough. I just love these books. And I hope everyone listening with children or grandchildren goes and gets your hands on a copy, because very rarely do we find something that's not only addressing a difficult issue, but that does so in a way that doesn't breed that internal shame about ourselves and our bodies and all of that toxic energy that comes into sexuality. Like, it's not there. It's just about the good pictures and bad pictures. I couldn't speak more highly of it. So thank you, Kristen, for being here. I just appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Shannon.
You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Lako. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face. So thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at paring_down, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.